Hi, y'all. I'm Catherine Rose with getWise. I'm the CEO and founder, and getWise provides on-demand expert advice to help small businesses, entrepreneurs, and professionals accelerate their business or career growth. Our nearly 1,000 experts from around the globe provide affordable one-on-one advice that helps people go farther faster in their business or career. And in this session, we have with us Laura Leach, a getWise expert and IACC certified coach. She's also the owner of Meredith Consulting and the former manager of talent acquisition at The Gap. She has over 20 years of recruiting experience in technology and brings a unique perspective to her coaching style. Laura helps mature women in tech build self-confidence, simplify the process of transitioning into a career with purpose, teaching them how to create clear, actionable job strategies, and advocate for the salary they deserve. Welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, tell me a little bit about your journey from, the career coaching or recruiting at The Gap to now where you have your own company.
Yeah. So before becoming a career coach, I was a technical recruiter for over 20 years, kind of bounced in and out of corporations and agencies, and even had my own company. And about 5 years into that independent consulting, working as an independent recruiter, I realized that I wasn't happy. And I started making up excuses to start cooking dinner early, going and doing, yoga classes at noon, and taking my dogs for a walk longer, it was going for an hour, 2 hours. And I realized I was kind of ignoring the elephant in the room. I really wasn't happy and I wasn't fulfilled. I was kind of miserable, but I was masking it with all these other things that I was doing throughout the day that was making me feel like I had a purpose.
Right.
When I realized that I needed to make a change, I really started to kind of peel back the layers. I myself reached out to a mentor who happened to be a coach, unbeknownst to me. And we kind of started to peel back the layers and talk about what was it that was working, what wasn't working. And I realized I just didn't want to do recruiting anymore. I just didn't want to be a recruiter anymore. But what I loved about recruiting was helping my candidates get past the goal line, get through the goal line. I loved helping them with figuring out how they were going to present themselves, their interview skills, helping them negotiate their salaries, really hand-holding them through the process, which I loved. The other side of recruiting, I did not like as much anymore. And I just kind of had outgrown that passion for it. So what I realized was I was able to take all the things that I loved about recruiting and create a program, really a kind of a step-by-step program to help women transition and simplify that transition into finding a new job or a career or a career pivot that made them feel good about themselves again. And that's how I arrived at coaching and realized that this was something that there was a need in the in corporate, in the universe, really, and more of us were needed.
Fantastic. So, as a career coach and former recruiter for many years, what are you seeing out there in the job market now?
Well, a lot of things. It's really interesting. Being a recruiter for long enough, I've seen a lot of different economic ups and downs of various kinds. And it's an interesting market right now. So we used to say it was either a candidate-driven market or an employer-driven market. And right now, it's interesting. It's both. And we really haven't seen that in a very long time. There are a lot of great jobs out there. There's also a lot of very good talent out there. I truly believe and am seeing that companies are being mindful about their hires, about who they're hiring and how they will make an impact in their organization. So although we've seen a slowdown in hiring and obviously some big pauses, stops, freezes, I do believe that my clients are still interviewing and getting offers. So it's happening. It's just being very selective.
It's interesting because, we heard so much about the Great Resignation and all these people are leaving the workforce, and, the conversation really shifted to like, how can you retain talent? And then all of a sudden we have a lot of companies doing layoffs and things like that. And so we the folks and some of the folks I know that have gotten laid off or, in different situations are like, well, why is it so hard for me to find a job? Because all you hear about the fact that there's such a big gap, and there's such a number of positions open. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of variables in that, right? A lot of people who got laid off hadn't interviewed in years. Most of my clients have 10, 15 years, haven't interviewed. The landscape is different. The process is different. Even in the last few years, the process has changed and is different, but definitely from 10, 15 years ago. I think there's a lot of uncertainty around where do I fit in now that I have all of this experience. I've been at one company for a long time. The lens looks different. So I think for some, the question is, how do I better market myself for the landscape today? Right. And instead of why can't I find a job, what could I do to make myself more marketable? And how do I learn the new and more modern ways of getting a job than just calling up a friend and asking, hey, can you hire me?
Exactly. So what are some of the challenges that you see for candidates today, and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, a few things. That's a great question. Everyone is concerned about their resume not getting through the applicant tracking system, the robot. So there's that. There's a myth there, I do have to say, because it is really a person behind the robot that's pulling the triggers on the robot. But really learning, I think one of the ways that we could overcome how do we get past these roadblocks or constraints is how are we better presenting ourselves? How are we looking at a job description and truly asking ourselves, are we the right candidate for this role? Yes, we can do the job, but are we the right candidate? And then the nuances between companies. So I like to explain it from a resume perspective. If my first language was Portuguese and you started speaking Portuguese to me, immediately I would think, you know me, you know my culture, you know my people. I probably would start asking you about family members if you knew them. Right. So in each of those job descriptions, we're going to see possibly product manager, I'll use as an example. You can see a product manager position and it'll have 5 different descriptions underneath it. So how do you become 5 different people? And it's really understanding how to read that job description and make sure that you're speaking the same language as that particular job in that particular company. So every product manager might speak Portuguese, but a different dialect. So we need to learn how to market ourselves toward that dialect.
Got it. And you mentioned that there are a lot of stories and things out there about bots. I mean, they do have artificial intelligence that does scan the resumes, right? But you mentioned that there's a real person there. So how do you get through that, through that initial screen?
Sure. One, I always think applying to a job is the very last step that you should be attempting in your job search. You should have exhausted all of your efforts, from people who you know and love and would do anything for you, to networking, to understanding the industry, to finding people within the organization who can be your champions and help you through the process. That's one. The way to get through it is literally to get through it. And if you're not going around it, is understanding what that person on the other side is asking for. So the person that really writes the job description is the hiring manager. Last person to touch the job description is the recruiter, right? They go and fluff it up and make it pretty and go and post it to all and socialize it everywhere. So really you're in the mind of the hiring manager. So look at the job description and ask. They are saying 3 to 5 years. They are saying 5 to 10 years. They are saying that you need to be an expert at this. They are saying that you need to understand e-commerce or payments or whatever it may be. You need to make sure you do understand those things and demonstrate them, not just up here, but on paper, so that it's glaringly obvious that you have all of those triggers in the back, that you've hit all those boxes. Some of those are requirements and they're non-negotiables. They're hard stops. No offense to anyone. They're just hard stops. That's the requirement. Some of them were that it would be nice to have. Some of them, it would be a bonus if you had this. So even though we think we're perfect for the role, we really need to dissect that job description and ask ourselves, where do we shine? And if we're leading with our strengths, how do we demonstrate that we can we can demonstrate that we have what the hiring manager is looking for in that job description, and very clearly and very concisely. You don't have that much time. You may only have a quick 6-second glance. So we need to make sure that we're almost kind of spoon feeding that we are the right person for this role by speaking their language and understanding the ask of the job.
Well, I also know that, sometimes these job descriptions are this laundry list of the impossible candidate, right? And there are statistics that, men will apply for a job if they have 40%, and women need 90 plus, almost 100% of the qualifications that they feel that they need that in order to apply for the job. So, when you're saying, you're looking at this job description, how do you tell what is the nice to haves and what is the needs to haves? Because they don't always spell that out.
Yeah, sure. So in a job description, in a typical job description, we'll have company information, and then it'll be, we're hiring such and such to join our team to do what? And then there's the job responsibilities, basically what you're going to do when you get there. And then the job requirements, like what you need to be successful, right? That's kind of how I look at it. So in that second paragraph, that's the ask of the job. We're hiring a product manager to come in and solve what? To join a team that's working on what? So demonstrate that you either have that experience or you have the potential to have be able to solve that problem. And then when we look at the job responsibilities, I usually say the first 3 to 5 bullet points are usually those are pretty important. That's what you're going to be doing when you get there. And you definitely need to have that experience, be able to either speak to it. You've already had that experience, or how would you go and achieve some of those bullet points in your past, or match them up to things that you've done in the past. And the requirements are the same thing. You'll notice that it'll have 3 to 5 years, master's degree, experience in this, nice to have. It would be great if you did. This would be preferred. So it goes down most of the time, the way that we write. So I always say the first 3 to 5 bullet points in that requirements is something that you're going to probably need to have, or at least as close to as possible. So that's kind of how I break down the job description. And you're right about men. Men will just apply. And if the statistic changes depending on your source, but there's something about not being 100% that stops women from applying, which is why I always say, applying should be the last thing that you should do.
Got it. Okay. And what are some resume tips? I mean, you mentioned about, kind of really looking at the job and making sure you feel like you're a good fit candidate, but, how do you get that resume to the top of the pile? There was that article or the news story recently about a woman who printed her resume on the top of a cake and delivered it, right? Because that's how badly she wanted to work there. But are you recommending that, like, when you go to apply for the job, you take those top 3 things that they're really looking for and maybe feed those into your resume to make sure that those keywords match, kind of thing?
Yeah, that's fair. And I loved that story. And I don't think people need to go to that extent, although she was a creative and she needed to do something very creative, and that made a big impact. Right. But if you read the story, it was more around the relationship that she had with her Instacart delivery driver. But needless to say, I do think it's important that we think about our resume. We read like the letter F. So the top left, if you look at heat sensors, we always look at the top left of a piece of paper first, which has the most heat, which means that's the most real estate that's the prime real estate you need on your resume. It's really important to incorporate keywords into your resume that match that dialect. So we should be aligning our resume with every single job description. One size does not fit all. And how we go about doing that is we can take top 25 jobs we're interested in and break them out, like I said, into what's the ask, what's the responsibilities, what's the requirements, and start looking across and seeing some of those keywords across, and pull up a list of keywords and start incorporating those back in where it's appropriate. That can be really helpful. But going back to the structure of the resume, if we read like an F, it's really important that we get that information out really quickly. And also, if we have 2 pages, which I'll say anything over 10 years is 2 pages. Stop cramming it onto 1 page. Anything over 10 years is 2 pages. But we also know human beings, we're lazy, right? We will read the first sentence of a paragraph and the last sentence of the paragraph and I kind of get what it's about. So what we want to do is we want to use that knowledge to optically give the reader what we want them to see about our experience in each one of the jobs that we've had. And on that last page, we're going to skim, and whatever's on the bottom of the last page is going to be the last thing that person probably will remember, and maybe even enough to make them go back and start over again and read the front. So remember that that's also prime real estate on that second page at the very bottom.
Excellent. Thank you. And so, all right, we got through the initial process. We landed the interview. I've heard all these stories about these marathon interviews. You have to interview with like 10 people. Let's start just at the beginning. Like I've got an interview. I personally haven't interviewed for a job in probably 20 years, I would think, right? And so when I go, like, what are some of the things that you see that, how do you coach your clients through that first interview process?
Yeah. So the first interview is recruiter, right? Recruiter is just going to be asking for, your background, how much you cost, and what's your availability, and what do you know about us, and why should we hire you? Very, very simple, quick. We usually go to the hiring manager, who's probably going to dig a little bit deeper to decide if you might be a fit for the team and for the company. So let's say we got past that. And I think the tell me about yourself, which I talk a lot about in interview prep and with my clients. And then understanding how to tell your story, right? Being a good storyteller, being able to control the conversation so it doesn't feel like an interrogation, and then being prepared to answer usually the top 7 things that we're looking for. So that's strategic thinking, problem solving, decision making, communication, leadership, teamwork, and conflict resolution. If we have a story for all of those kind of 7 pillars, as I like to call them, of interview structures, most of the questions will fall into one or more of those categories. So understanding which stories do we want to tell for this particular audience, and why do they care? I find most of the people that lose their footing in an interview or feel like they failed, or they're like, oh my God, that was the worst thing. It was horrible. And I just, they're never going to hire me. It's because we're telling stories that are not relevant to our audience. Tell stories that are relevant to our audience, right? We like to always tell our story, but no one cares unless they want to care, right?
Got it. Okay. And so when you're going to that first interview, you're saying like you have that 7 pillars and making sure that you kind of stay within those. If you have multiple interviews, or now I've noticed too with Zoom, you could be on an interview with like 7 other people, and people are sort of peppering questions. How can you really prepare yourself for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's intimidating, right? We know that over 75% of our communication is body language, and only 7% is the words that come out of our mouth. But it's the words that come out of our mouth that get us the job. So when we flip that and we're looking at everyone else's body language, and we're seeing that we have stoic people who are just staring straight ahead, or looking at their watch, or that they're working on something else, not paying attention, all of a sudden we start to sweat. We start to feel like we're not giving our best. They're not engaged. I think the key to me to panel interviews in a Zoom environment is making sure that you're giving every single person the eye contact, and making sure you're acknowledging each one of them as looking around to keep that eye contact as if we were sitting in a conference room together, and asking a lot of questions. It's okay to stop, clarify, and ask a question. So when we start to get more involved and make it more of a conversation instead of that interrogation, and we start to ask questions, even if it's a clarifying question, all of a sudden everyone gets engaged. And then it becomes a little bit more fair. And I don't know if it's a teeter-totter, it's still not going to be quite fair, but it gets a lot more comfortable. And then all of a sudden we can relax a bit and be more of our authentic self.
Well, there were a lot of statistics, with COVID, with women particularly having to step back from the workforce for a time. And some maybe said, you know what, I'm going to go do my side hustle full time, or I'm going to do something. And now they've sort of decided, well, you know what, maybe I do want to go back into corporate. How would you recommend folks address those gaps on their resumes?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, I think there's global and universal forgiveness period right now of a gap. I don't think I highly recommend not trying to cover up our gap. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
We were caregivers. We were taking care of our family. We were, and the CEO of our household, right? I don't think we have to explain our gaps. I don't think we need to apologize for taking care of ourselves and our family. If we had done, if we were working on other things, projects, volunteer work, helping out the school, helping teachers, making, you became the audiovisual expert for your home and your school. Whatever we did to make a contribution to make that as seamless and as less painless. I don't know if it was less painful. We could also add as some of the things that we were able to achieve while we were stepped outside of corporate. Personally, I don't think that we should explain it. I don't think we should have to, especially for my mat leave, like women coming back to work after having a baby. You created life. I don't know. To me, it's like a mic drop moment. I don't know if anyone needs an explanation. And you kept it alive, like, right? So I think that's a pretty big step. But I joke, but I think it's really important that we stand in who we are and boldly in why we are here and what we're doing and our purpose. And whether that be that meaning we stepped out of work to take care of our family or caregiver or whatever it may have been. That's who we are. And I don't think we should have to apologize for it or dress it up in any way at all.
Yeah, I understand that too. I feel the same way. I mean, I think that there are so many times in people's lives that they need to maybe step away or pivot or whatever. And, like you said, as long as you can demonstrate the fact that you grew in some way or you're recommitted to doing the job that you're applying for, then that should be a good thing for the company. And you mentioned earlier too, like one of the things that you really focus on is helping folks get what they're worth in the salary negotiations. I'm in sales. I've been in sales my whole career. And one of the things I do a little bit differently in sales is I almost always lead with price because I'm like, people are like holding on to the end of that presentation, that demo to find how much is it, right? And so I almost feel the same way. And of course, in sales, it's different too. Like if I ever interview for a sales position, I want to know what the total comp package is because I don't want to waste anyone's time, right? But so many people wait until the absolute end. They get the offer and they're like, what? This is how much it is? So when do you suggest you have those conversations about salary? And then a two-parter. So when do you have the conversation about the compensation? And then give us some tips on that salary negotiation.
Yeah, those are two great. Okay. So you have 2 times to negotiate your salary. The first time is when you're talking with the recruiter, right? What kind of salary are you looking for is what they're going to ask. How much do you cost? And you can say, can you share with me what the budget is for this role? It's going to give you an idea of salary band for the role. It's the minimum, the median, and the max. They're always going to give you the lowest, right? They're always going to give you, it's between 100 and 120, not 100 and 180, but they're going to give you the lowest. So that gives you a little bit of a framework. So you know that they have some room to negotiate. There are some companies out there that are coming out hard and saying, this is what it is. There is no room to negotiate. And this is, we can continue the conversation. There's also laws that are coming out. Gavin Newsom just signed into law in California that companies are starting to have to post what their base salary is on their job descriptions to help kind of alleviate some of that pay gap.
I think that's a great idea, honestly. I never understood why the mystery, because why would you want me to even apply for your job if you can't afford me, right?
Right. That's right. That's exactly right. Yes, and there's good and bad to this law, which I think it's a good step in the right direction. It doesn't include bonus, commission, other opportunities that are considered compensation, RSUs, stock, incentive, all the other pieces of compensation. But from a base, that's a good starting point. And I think it's important that we have a lot of transparency around that. So the first time we can negotiate is when we're having that initial conversation with the recruiter. The second time we get to negotiate is when we have the offer, right? Whether it's a verbal offer or whether it's a written offer, we need to have an offer because we have nothing else to negotiate. At that point, we might have learned a lot more about the role. Most of the time, I find that the scope of the role, what you're going to be doing in that role, after you've talked to multiple people who have multiple opinions about your success and what they need from you once you get there, is very different than the job description. So oftentimes the scope and the job description after talking with people may not match. It's a great opportunity to negotiate for a higher salary and or a higher title, other kinds of compensation, bonus, stock incentives, etc.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the second time. When it comes to negotiating, once we have an offer, you can't negotiate until you have an offer. So once we negotiate, we want to come up with what we need, what our ask is, what we need. I like to ask I like to have three options when I negotiate. The first option, it would be great if I got it. The second option, it would be amazing. The third option, there's no way that they are going to give that to me. That is out of I know that's out. So now we're down to two options, which personally I've already said yes to. These are my yes packages. But what it does is it gives the power back to the employer but I call it no choice with a smile. But I've already said yes to the first two, right? So we have to look at, when we look at, that's kind of the end technique. But when we look at what we're negotiating, we are looking at what is it they're asking us to come in and do? And what's the impact that we could make? And then what are we learning from it? What's our experience going to be like? All of those things outside of base salary and commission and all the other compensation factors, I think are really important. I feel like people forget, what is it I'm going to be doing and what experience am I going to be gaining? Because that to me is part of compensation. That to me is something more, even can be even more valuable than part of the paycheck.
Okay, great.
Answer your question?
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, like from a sales perspective, again, it's always been like, here's your base and then your total comp package would be XYZ, and I hear what you're saying in the fact that like the experience can be great, but I also know from personal experience that sometimes you take that lower thing and then you get if you're lucky, your 4% cost of living increases, and then people who came in after you could go in higher compensation, and particularly with women, we tend to think that way, right? Like, oh, this is a great opportunity, and maybe not ask for as much as they could get, right?
Yeah.
But of course, you could probably research the salaries and stuff, right?
You research the salaries. There's tons of places to get a lot of data points and you can get information. I think it's also important when women typically don't get the salary that they're looking for because they don't ask, right? Yeah. That's just as simple. They don't want to be greedy. They're afraid that the offer is going to get rescinded. They're afraid people are going to think poorly of them because it's all about money for them. So they tend to back down. I also think that, and I have my clients do this, say the words. You probably have said those in your head, and maybe even written them out, but you've actually never said them. You have to own that. I am worth this. I am worth this much. I would like to, propose this much. This is what I'm looking for. Get those words so you're comfortable hearing them in your own head, because oftentimes we've never even said them. So that's that's really important. And I tell this story a lot. I was in sales. A recruiter is a sales position. Yeah. And I just recently told the story. I never negotiated in all those years. I never negotiated my base salary. I didn't even know I could. Here I was negotiating salaries for other people, and I was doing a great job. I always just thought, I'll make it up in commission. I know what I'm worth. I don't have to worry about that, until I found out that my coworker was making more of a base. And when you're working paycheck to paycheck in your 20s, you're a little pissed. You're not happy about that. So, and it was because I didn't ask. I didn't even know I could. And it was interesting to me to come to that realization, being a coach now and coaching women in salary negotiation, realizing so many people don't feel that they have the power or are empowered to ask. They don't even know they can. And I think part of what I'm passionate about is giving the women the tools so that they know what they can and cannot do. I think the younger generations that are coming up are spending a lot more time, but they have a lot more information available. And they're also being coached around how to negotiate and what's important and what you can ask for. But again, I will always go back to what is it we're looking at in that job that we're going to be learning from. And how do we compensate that? Is this my trajectory? Is this going to help me get to my next level and where I want to go in my life?
Right. And I mean, so we'll fast forward to, we did the interview, we sent a resume and we got the interview, we're at the salary negotiation. And then all of a sudden I've heard so many people say lately, the ghost, right? You have this, or you do the interview and they're like, you're the top candidate. And then all of a sudden they're gone. Or you actually have it, you have a verbal offer and then they're gone. So let's talk a little bit about the follow-up first from the candidate side. And then what do you do if you feel like you're being ghosted?
Yeah, well, the follow-up, I think it's important that we follow up with every individual that we speak with at the end of an interview. If it's available, sometimes the recruiter will gather your thank you and send it on their behalf. So you don't have their actual email addresses, but you could always send them a nice thank you in an email during LinkedIn, or you can actually find their email through free email finders and find their work email. So that's always something that you can do to kind of bypass that. And I do think it's important. And if we all had addresses, I would tell you to handwrite it. But I think handwriting a thank you note is something that is really impacting because no one does it anymore, and it really will set you apart. But I know it's harder to do as we all work from home. If you feel like you're being ghosted, or you feel like, you know what, I always say, like, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, and you got all the way there and you just keep getting, you just keep not getting the offer. Something's happening in maybe how you're selling yourself in that final stage of the interview process. Something's happening. Maybe you've lost your conviction. Maybe you're not as confident as you were from the beginning because these 7 interviews have just worn you down. Whatever it is, something might have happened. However, if I'm a hiring manager and I have somebody that has the same sales experience, same education background, but this one has domain experience, they understand the industry or the platform or the technology, I'm going to probably go with them first, because then I don't have to train this one. So there are other variables that come up, right? If an offer gets rescinded at verbal, it could be that, somebody's brother, sister's cousin, got put in there. I saw that quite often throughout my career. Or immediately that headcount had to be pulled. Mm-hmm. Like, for whatever reason, the headcount got pulled. These are all variables that are out of your control. But what you can control is the impression that you leave when you leave that last interview, the last conversation that you have in that interview. And if we feel like we're being ghosted and we've contacted the recruiter or we've reached out to the hiring manager and we're not getting anything, oftentimes there's not a whole lot we can do. We can try to talk with other people in the organization, but I always think maybe that's just a blessing in disguise. Stay in touch with that person, stay in touch with the hiring managers and recruiters that you interview with, stay in touch with the people that you've interviewed with on the panel. Perhaps you will be the first person they think of when that job opens up again. You might have been second runner up, or that headcount got pulled, but they will surely think, I don't want to go through that entire interview process again. I already know a candidate that was perfect and we didn't pull the trigger on. So let's call that person and see if they're available.
So that's a great point, because what if they're going to ghost you in the process or put you off, how are they going to be to work for, right? So
it could be a red flag for sure.
Yeah, it is disappointing. You spent a lot of time, but it's like anything, sometimes it is, the door, the window opens because the door closes, or whatever that saying is. And, sure. Kind of keeping it in perspective. But the point that you mentioned too, I mean, that actually happened to me in my career. Many, many years ago, when I first started, I was in marketing. And I interviewed for a role, and they went with another candidate. And 6 months later, because I thanked everyone afterwards, I said, I completely understand. Because they told me, they said, oh, we hired, this other person because they had these, skill sets. And I said, I totally get it. She's a perfect, fit for the role. 6 months later, she decided it wasn't for her, and they called me right away, and I took the position. So, and it set my career up. So you're right. I mean, sometimes it doesn't happen when it doesn't happen at that time, but later on they could come back. So yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We're running at the end of our time. So I did want to leave the audience with your top tips, your top 3 tips, top 5 tips that you would like the audience to know about, searching and getting their new opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I'll lead with where we ended. Remember, just like finding the love of your life, or finding the person that you're going to spend the rest of your life with, your partner, you're going to have to kiss a lot of frogs, right? It just happens, right? And like, don't take it personally. It just wasn't the right match, right? And it's easy to think it's me, it's my resume, it's my LinkedIn, it's me, and maybe I'm not good enough, but really it's just not the right match. That's all. The second thing I would say is constantly be polishing up your resume and your LinkedIn profile. Keep those things up to date. Don't wait until later, right? Don't wait until you have to. Plus, if you are if you're a hiring manager or you're actively part of the hiring team, you also want to keep your LinkedIn profile up to date so that people can see who they're going to be working with, what kind of team they're going to be working on. So I always think that's really important. 3, pull out that Add a Girl file, or at least I have an Add a Girl file. I have for years. I put emails in there. I used to have paper in one, cards people would send me, but sometimes I have to sit there and go through it and think, oh, here's a whole bunch of people who are recognizing me for how I helped them. Also, some of my strengths. So I'm hearing some of my strengths in these thank yous. So remember that you are good at what you do, and people have hired you to do that because you're good, right? 3rd, right? If you've gotten through the interview process, your resume and LinkedIn are working, right? A lot of people will go backwards when you don't need to. If recruiters and hiring managers are reaching out to you, or you got to the interview process, your marketing materials are working for you. They're saying the right thing. So that would be another one. And then I really want to touch on salary negotiation. It's so important to ask. And even if we only ask for a little bit, this will also propel us in our next role. So if we take a step back, which sometimes we have to do, it will be harder to move forward and that much longer to get forward. I used to say this to my hiring managers: the next time she's going to go, the next time she's going to make 30,000 more than she's making now is when she goes to work for somebody else. So pay her now, right? Because do you see how that's working, right? So remember, it's really important to advocate for yourself now, because this will continue to snowball upward for you as throughout your career.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you everyone out there for tuning in. And, if you'd like to get advice on your career or job search, head over to Laura's expert profile on getwiseconnect.com, and we will go ahead and put that link into the post. And if you have other burning business or career questions, we're here to support you. So just pop on over to getwiseconnect.com and find your expert. So again, thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone. And until next time.
All right. Thank you.